Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special spoiler review for Marvel Studios' 24th film, Black Widow. After 2 years since July 2nd of 2019, with the release of Spider-Man Far From Home, we have been waiting for the next Marvel film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and this weekend we were given it with Kate Shortland's Black Widow. We have three very excited fans that are going to talk about the film, what we loved, what we maybe think could have been improved. This is, in the end, a very positive discussion about the film. And I'm very excited to be joined by two wonderful film fans and comic book fans. First, everybody's going to be shocked when he starts talking about it because we know him as our DC Snyder loving fan. Ben, how you doing?
Great, excited to talk about all things Black Widow.
Yes, wonderful. And then we have Mr. Jack here. Jack, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm also excited to talk Black
Widow. Well, then, without further ado, let's just get right into the film. It's been 2 years since. Spoiler alert, by the way. Spoiler alert for not only Black Widow, but for all films featuring her, including Avengers Endgame, because I'm sure we'll get into the big spoiler from that film. So 3, 2, 1. It's been 2 years since we saw her sacrifice herself and fall to her death on Vormir. Many people, questioned whether this movie was necessary after that. I want to first, just before we get into the film itself, what do we think about the fact that this will be Scarlett Johansson, Natasha Romanoff's final MCU entry? Ben, what do you think?
I think it's incredibly poetic that she got to go out on her own note, and I really appreciated that. And I also think that the fact that she got to go out on one of the best MCU films goes to show how strong her character has been throughout the entire MCU. So I'm delighted about it. I would have liked for this film to come out a long time ago because I think there would have been a lot more excitement for it, but I'm just happy we got the movie we got, so I don't really care when it came out.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got it. I thought it's a really good film. I do wish we got it a while ago because I think you can see within this film that there's potential for multiple Black Widow movies and that there would have been more emotional impact come Avengers Endgame if we got this before that. But in the end, I'm just glad she got her own movie.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I do like the fact that when it comes to, I know people will argue me on this, but I truly think if you're looking at the Infinity Saga, I think the Trinity for me was Iron Man, Black Widow, and Cap. I think they're the three characters that shaped the story the most. And the fact that each of them, I think, got perfect endings is beautiful. And I think this is her perfect ending. She gets to be the focus after being, the secondary character in Iron Man 2 and the secondary character in The Winter Soldier. She gets to be in the spotlight. And I think it just speaks to Scarlett Johansson that she was very gracious in that she has an incredible supporting cast in this movie, which I'm sure we'll talk about. She could have made it all about herself, and still she was, offering the hand and passing the baton. So let's just get into the film. We start with this opening in Ohio in 1995, where we learn about Natasha, played by Ever Anderson, who I thought in this and the opening credits sequence, I thought did a wonderful job. What do we think about the Ohio scenes and the opening action set piece, which was escaping Ohio from S.H.I.E.L.D.?
I thought it was amazing. I really loved the setting. I thought it looked great. And I loved the family dynamic that they did have, even though we kind of knew it wasn't real and that there's something wrong, like with Rachel Weisz and with David Harbour and all that. But I thought that Violet McGraw and Ever Anderson did such an amazing job of selling you on the fact that these are children who want to live their happy suburban life in Ohio. And then when the action breaks out, you really do feel a sadness because you just want, particularly Violet McGraw, who's such a little sweetheart. And she's been in so many different things. She's so cute. And you just want her and Natasha to be happy. Like, that's really what I wanted when I was watching that. And I felt a lot of emotion in the first half an hour film. I thought it was really amazing. What about you, Jack?
I really liked it too. We've seen this before, like Russians living in America, but I still think they handled it very well. I think when it comes to the kid actors, I thought they were both great. I think Ever Anderson, because Natasha, I think already kind of knew about the situation. She kind of played that subtlety and more grown up for her age, mature feeling for Natasha, but I think Violet McGraw kind of played like this childish, innocent, naive very well, which set up for like the emotional impact of Elena later on and her being the only one who thought it was real and all that. And I thought the action of them getting on the plane was a very good scene too.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think what really, you were talking about like when Ben, when we were talking about like when we discovered that this family was more of a lie. And I think you saw that when Melina, played by Rachel Weisz, when she's talking to David Harbour away from the table, she dips into that Russian accent when she was doing the American accent before. And I thought that was a nice little touch to like start to build up the suspense. And I think that it was, as a fan of It Chapter 1, seeing a little kid ride a bike at the beginning of this movie, I was like, oh, okay. And I thought it was really touching that, you see Natasha riding a bike alone and she sees other kids playing and, she just sees them. She doesn't go over and play with them because there's a part of her that keeps her away. And I thought that just again, from the first little nugget of this movie, I felt like we were capturing Natasha's unique perspective and her unique character. We are introduced to Elena with that upside down thing that they bring back to at the end of the movie, which I thought was a nice callback later. And what I really liked about this, because I feel like maybe in lesser hands, the movie would have started at the table and would have just said, okay, we're going to start with the big action. But they ease us in and you have like a good like 3 minutes probably of just feeling this family dynamic. And that just impacted then the action because you knew what they were losing. You knew this quiet life, the fireflies, which we'll get into later, you saw how much it mattered to Natasha and why then when everything got upended, why it mattered so much. So I like this. It was a little slow at the beginning, but it made more of an impact later. So I thought it showed real confidence, I think, in Kate Shortland's hands, who I'm sure we'll be talking about throughout this. Yeah, I really like the opening. We have American Pie, if we want to bring it up here, as we saw I think it was a football game being played. What do we think about American Pie and the link that it had to Yelena in that? Because it does get brought up later.
Jack, why don't you go?
I thought the whole opening scene, like there's a lot of stuff that's set up that's paid off very well later on. I think if you didn't have this scene, there's not a lot of emotion that we feel throughout the rest of the film, like the upside down thing, the whistling, the fireflies, the song, the photo that Natasha gives Elena. So there's a lot of good setups here. So I think they were all very well done.
Yeah, definitely. And it's to know I caught it on the second time, and we'll get into the opening credits scene in a sec. Natasha rips the photo strip in half, and that's why Elena has the half of it later. So that's just something we'll get into it. But I do like the photo bit. And the last thing about this that I really loved was Melina when David Harbour and I'm going in between their character name and their actors' names. When Alexi and Elena go to pack up, and Natasha and Melina are left on the table, and Melina just says, "I'm sorry." It just those two words I feel like captured their dynamic. And for a character who is out of the four of them is in the movie the least amount of times, it's little moments like that I feel like Rachel Weisz just captures her character so well and so quickly that you completely know who she is. And that's a tribute to the script of course, but I think Rachel Weisz, she's I feel like she's of the caliber of like the Michael Douglases, of like an established actor coming into this franchise and really bringing her A game to it as she would any other project. And I think she delivers one of the better supporting performances of the franchise as a whole. So let's get into Smells Like Teen Spirit, the opening credits. No, I don't want to, I'm not going to be too hyperbolic throughout, but I truly think that this is on par of some of the best Bond opening credit sequences. I thought it was fantastic. What did we think of this? Because this has been a little bit of a talking point. Some people, it didn't vibe with them, but I loved it. What did we think of Smells Like Teen Spirit?
You can go ahead, Ben.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought it was amazing. The cover it really worked with what they were trying to show. And I thought what they were trying to show was incredibly bold for a Marvel film, and I was delighted. It really set the stage for what you felt was a more emotional, more stripped down Marvel film, which is something that I am delighted to have, and I'm happy that we do have. And it was, I thought, just so impactful and so powerful. And I cannot stress enough how incredible it was that Kate Shortland was let, more than I think any other Marvel director, tell the story she wanted to tell. There's not a lot of outside Marvel forces like that she needs to set up or anything like that. So the fact that she was able to have this credit scene to make the movie that she wanted to make, that's clearly darker, more gritty, and more character focused. It's very exciting to see Marvel do this, and I really think that Kate Shortland is someone who we're going to be speaking a lot about going forward, because she nailed this credit scene and she nailed everything in this film.
Yeah, I agree. I really loved the opening credits. They're a rare thing in the Marvel movies. There's I think only been a few that have been this long, like Incredible Hulk or
Incredible
Guardians of the
Hulk.
Galaxy 2.
Yeah, Incredible Hulk is the only other one to actually have an open, like Guardians 1 and 2 are just scenes,
Yeah,
and Iron Man 2, also Iron Man 2 is a scene. Incredible Hulk is the only one to do this type of montage sequence that Black
yeah,
Widow does. So yes, it's definitely a rare thing in this franchise.
yeah, yeah. And I thought it was very bold. I honestly didn't expect them to go that far in terms of like the human trafficking and all of that, especially of women and girls. And I think it set up a lot of the like good themes and all of that for later on in the film. And I was just surprised with how bold it was. And then it's kind of like with the Incredible Hulk too, where you don't have to tell his origin story for that. You kind of just zoom through it in the credits. You kind of get the idea of Natasha and Elena's like growing up throughout the Red Room just through these credits.
Yeah, I completely agree. We should mention Malia J is who did the cover, to a wonderful, wonderful performance from her vocally. And yeah, I agree with everything. I think it was very distinct. It was very concise, which I think, it wasn't just like a series of cuts. Like every cut had impact. Every image they showed meant something. And especially on second viewing, there are things you catch, like you see them staging the Christmas photo op in the opening credits. And so I just thought that was very well done. It, as Ben was saying, really showed the distinct voice that Shortland had for this film, which I really appreciated. And there was just, again, also using that song choice in specific, it's a song that you wouldn't expect to hear, and you didn't expect to hear that way. And the fact that they used it, I think, again, just put more, like, it just made the film this sequence more surreal and more alarming. And the fact that it didn't fit, you're like, how does this fit? Again, it just echoed where those characters shouldn't be in the Red Room. And so that whole dynamic I just really loved. And I also think that this was the best way to have a movie for Black Widow that was true to the character, that also kept its younger fans in mind. Because Marvel is not only known for, being a family-friendly franchise, but a lot of young women and young girls look up to Natasha. I know that because I work at a summer camp, and a lot of them told me this week that their favorite Avenger is Black Widow. So I think this was a tasteful way to be true to the character and have that darker edge to her without alienating those younger audiences. So I really appreciated this opening, and I think if any sequence will stand the test of time from this, I think this may be the one. Yeah, really, really strong. Any other comments on the opening credits? If not, we'll get into the first act. So the first act of the film. So I would say this is up to the Taskmaster bridge fight. What do we think of this? This is Natasha being on the boat, tricking us, thinking that Ross is about to get her. And then Mason, meeting Mason, who gives her a little bit of a new life. Speaking of Bond, she's watching a Bond film. And then we also get Yelena's intro, as well as the Taskmaster action fight. What do we think of all this? How did this get you into the groove of the Black Widow film?
Jack, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I thought all of those scenes were pretty good. It started off pretty slow, but I didn't mind that at all. I think it's good for setting up where this character is. But they didn't spend too long in like her being on the run or undercover or anything. They get right into it relatively quickly. I liked Florence Pugh, Elena's opening scene, the fight choreography there, and her performance when she was like reawakened with I forget what they call it, the little poof thing.
The chemical kind of
Yeah,
chemical. It's the MacGuffin, the MacGuffin.
yeah. I thought she did a good job with that. The Taskmaster fight scene when we first meet him or her later on.
Spoilers.
Yeah. I thought that was a really good fight scene. That was one of my favorites in the movie. One of my disappointments, I like what they did with Taskmaster, but I feel like we saw pretty much every single action beat with them in the trailer, so there wasn't a ton of surprise in terms of that, but I still thought it was a great fight scene.
Mhm.
And that's really where we get the most mimicking powers shown on display. And the one thing about that scene, which is kind of a problem I have throughout the movie, is it's a little over the top sometimes. And I would have preferred them to keep it a little more grounded and subtle. Like when she's driving and that rocket just hits her car and it just flips so many times and then it nearly falls over the edge and then just like a few seconds later she gets up like, ooh, okay. Like I would have wished it was a little more grounded than that, but that's my only complaint within all of these opening scenes.
Yeah, on that note, Jack, and then we'll run to Ben. We'll get Ben's thoughts on the first act. I did feel there was a lot of times in the movie where you could feel that they know Black Widow doesn't have any superpowers, and they were, trying their best to make a traditional Marvel movie that with this character. And honestly, I think we probably agree the movie's at its best when it's being true to the character and not trying to, do all these crazy things. Like I saw a joke. Now I think the Vormir cliff is a bigger cliff than the building that they have the scene with Elena. But I did think it was funny that somebody was like, if she can survive that fall, don't you think
Yeah.
she can survive the Vormir? So I thought that was funny. But yes, I agree a lot with what Jack was saying in terms of the opening. I would have loved maybe one scene at the beginning where Natasha really sets up, the fact that she's never been alone before, stuff like that, just to make it a little bit of a clear starting point for her arc in this film specifically. But I think what we have works well enough, and it's thankful because you have Johansson who's able to, again, like all these actors, portray those nuances very well. And I really loved Elena's intro because I think it really showed us how just great action storytelling. It gave us everything we need to know about this character. The way, like, she pulled an Arya Stark where she put the knife in the other hand and put it in. It showed us that she was very smart in the field. But then when she was awakened by the nanites or the whatever, the MacGuffin, that she was a very caring and that sweet girl that we met in the beginning was still in her. So I thought, again, very efficient action storytelling. And I love the Taskmaster fight as well. And you talked about the explosion where, yes, Natasha Romanoff, don't know if she would have been ready to fight a minute later. I do like that thing coming out of nowhere because it shows the juxtaposition of the life she has currently and the life she left behind. It just like blows up in her face. And beautiful cinematography from Gabriel Beristain, I think, when she comes out of the lake and she's looking at the vials and the red light is flashing in her. I thought the cinematography in this movie was really well done. And so, yeah, Ben, what do you think about the first act?
I agree with everything that was said. This was probably my favorite part of the movie. I loved all the locations. When I said jokingly a few days ago that it reminded me of the rhythm section, this was the part that reminded me of it the most because that film is very stripped down, very raw in its cinematography and its look and feel, and with its lead star kind of not necessarily deglamming themselves, but I felt like there were similar beats, and that when I kind of made that realization that this was the kind of movie, it was more of a stripped down, character focused action film. That when I realized it was on the ship in Norway, and it was that beautiful mountain that she was around, an incredible location, and I just fell in love with the movie from then on in. It really set the stage for me. It's exactly what I wanted in a Black Widow film, and I never thought I'd get it. So it made me really happy. I did like the Taskmaster fight. I thought it was really cool. I liked how, you always felt like there was a sense of urgency in the movie, and I think that's a test to the great editing, and the really good directing from Kate Shortland, as we talked about. And the action scenes didn't feel as Marvelized as they did in other films. Like, you can tell, we know that Marvel has a second unit for all of their action scenes. And it's really obvious in films like, say, Captain Marvel, where it feels like the action was done by one group of people, the film was done by another group, and they were just kind of stitched together. In this film, I felt it was all collective. I felt that it all really went in on the same vision. I thought that it was all very similar, and I was really happy with that, because I felt one of the least disjointed films that I've seen from Marvel. So I thought that this entire opening act and Yelena's scene, I thought was also just incredible. I only have one complaint with this movie, and that's that I think it could have been R-rated. And I think if it was, it could have been even better. Now, it was amazing as is, but I just think it could have went even further with all of the really great things in the film. So I'll probably say that again later, but in the fact, I thought if this was R-rated, they could have gone for, they could have really pushed it. But I think it's amazing as is.
Great, yeah. One thing before we get into Yelena and Natasha's meetup is that I don't know if this is canon. I don't know if they made this canon, but personally, if you're listening to this, you probably have seen Captain America: Civil War, and in that whole first action sequence is about obtaining a little red vial that I think previously had been said that it was like Hulk blood or red Hulk blood. But if you want to recontextualize that as that red vial that awakens the Black Widows in this movie, since they're set very closely in the timeline, I'll be completely fine with it, because I was thinking back like, ooh, what if that's what they're doing? Maybe that's what that thing is. And they can, as Star Wars has done and any long running franchise has done, recontextualize certain details. I would love if maybe that's what the Civil War opening is all about. And that's maybe why, they're afraid to drop it, because we've seen when they drop or they explode, stuff can happen. So just a little MCU detail there. So now we go into Yelena and Natasha, Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson, who I'm going to go out and say that I think they're probably the best Marvel duo out of everybody we've seen in this franchise. I thought they were really strong together. I think both of them were their own characters, but I think plussed each other. And I think that's a tribute to the characters, but also the performances. And this first action scene that they had in Budapest was, I thought, just so well done. It was so well choreographed, but I think it really captured the intensity that these two characters feel for each other. Yelena feeling that Natasha left her behind, and Natasha, I think, feeling that Yelena brought her back into a world that she turned away and doesn't want to recognize her as a part of anymore. So there was so much intensity to like wanting to like silence the other from being put back in their lives. So I really just loved this sequence, first with the two of them, and then branching off to including the more widows and then Taskmaster coming back in. Before we go to that part, what did we think of just the kitchen fight between Yelena and Natasha?
I really liked
I thought it was perfect.
Fight. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
No, all I have to say is I thought it was pretty perfect. So you can go ahead. That's pretty much all I have to say. It was perfect.
I thought it was pretty perfect too. I think it's one of, if not the most like grounded and gritty fights we've seen in the Marvel movies. It felt very real, and not like a lot of these other fights have people with these insane superpowers, but this was just two people in a kitchen using their surroundings just to try and fight the other one. But you could tell that they weren't really necessarily trying to kill each other. But I liked how it ended too, with the curtain and the truth. So I thought it was a good fight.
Yeah, I think overall this is a good place to bring it up. But I feel like overall Marvel as a comic, as a company, as a studio, their ethos is these fantastical stories, but rooted in a grounded emotional state where it's like they're treating, what these characters are going through are relatable. Peter Parker is a relatable person. These people are people, these characters feel like people you could see on the street walking by you, or that you could be yourself. And I feel like this movie does it really well. A lot of the film is very grounded and raw and vulnerable, but it's still a spectacle. I still think that there are moments in this movie where you're watching and you're just like so impressed with what's happening visually. This being one of them, where just, this so well choreographed and every hit just really clicked. Now we get into the Black Widow chasing them. We have the car chase, Taskmaster involved. And we start to see those Marvel quips coming in, when Florence Pugh is like, should I duck or should I try and stop or duck and cover? For me, this worked better than I've enjoyed the Marvel comedy. I think it's a part of these movies that I really love. But I think it works so well here because they really got the family banter. And because this is a family movie where a family is at the center, a lot of the quips worked better because it's sister quipping, it's mother-daughter quipping. And so there's just it just really works better in these life or death scenarios that these people are quipping. What do you guys think of the comedy here? Especially because Florence Pugh, I don't think any of us knew she could be this funny. And she's hilarious. I think this is one of the funnier Marvel movies where every joke I feel landed.
Well, I'll say that I don't enjoy the Marvel comedy, and I didn't really enjoy it here. But I have to say, I thought in Black Widow it was probably the least cringy out of most of the movies I've seen. In fact, it was probably the best delivered because I think David Harbour he didn't do it as well as Florence Pugh, but Florence Pugh was a master at turning that dialogue that could not come across very well and making it come across very well. I thought she did a great job with all that. And I thought everyone did a great job with the Marvel comedy. And it's not a type of comedy I enjoy at all. In fact, it's ruined some of the movies for me. So the fact that this cast was able to deliver as well as they did just goes to show how great of a cast that they have. And they do have a great cast. And I think it is shown off really well in this scene with Elena and Natasha. And they do have great banter. They do have a great bond. And I think that was really solidified in this action scene where they finally get to reunite. And the story really gets set in motion in this scene. And I really appreciate all that.
Yeah, I'm kind of like wishy-washy on some of the Marvel comedy. I think it works in a lot of cases, but there are some cases like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 or Thor Ragnarok where I think a lot of the comedy's good, but there's maybe a little too much and it undercuts some moments that could be a little more emotional. But I thought here it was really good. There's only like one or two scenes where I would wish there's maybe a little less comedy and more emotion, but I think Florence Pugh easily did the best job with the comedy. I think especially because her comedy is more subtle. She's not like overtly trying to tell jokes or be quippy. I thought David Harbour was good too. I think he's intended to be a little more comedic. I think he did a good job with what he was given. But I think Florence Pugh, like in this scene with Natasha as they like leave the apartment and all that, the comedy, you can almost feel like they're just right back into that sister relationship, like time hadn't even passed or anything. And I thought that was done really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a Stranger Things fan, seeing David Harbour like let loose and get to be the comedic one, there you go, Ben's wonderful shirt of Will's drawing, but getting to see him like break free, being the more, not having to be the straight guy anymore. I really like that, and we'll of course talk about him in a little bit. But yeah, I really liked their dynamic from the moment they started. This action scene, which I don't know about you, gave me some Mission Impossible Fallout vibes. Maybe the setting did that, but I thought, again, another really well-helmed action sequence, especially when that Taskmaster shield went down the escalator. I just thought that was very cool. But we finally get to learn about Budapest because Natasha lets us know that Budapest is actually when it was her final mission before basically becoming a S.H.I.E.L.D. operative, where she thinks that she blew up Dreykov and Dreykov's daughter. What do we think about this? Do we think this was worth the wait to find out? Are you indifferent on learning about Budapest? What do we think? And especially because now we know how the movie ends. We know how this ties into the end.
I think we learned everything about Budapest that we needed to know for this movie. I would have liked, just its own, not within this movie, but at some point, just seeing some actual scenes with her and Clint during that time. But we get what we need to know about what happened there at that time for her within this movie, and they didn't waste any time or try and be complete fan service and please the fans by showing more of it. So I like that they were restrained with that and only showed what needed to be done for the character of Natasha in this film.
Yeah,
I'd say,
really quick, Ben,
go ahead.
before we get into this, I do want to ask you guys, what do you think about? I found it great restraint on Marvel that Hawkeye doesn't appear in the movie, that they didn't like try to boost Natasha up, that she's completely her and whoever they introduce in her movie are on their own. Because I was expecting a Hawkeye. I remember people thinking Hawkeye was going to be Taskmaster, but I was expecting Hawkeye to be in a Budapest flashback, and we only hear his voice. What do we think of that choice? And then Ben, you can give your thoughts on the sequence.
Oh, all I was going to say was that this only kind of occurred to me when Jack was talking about it, but we could see what happens in Budapest, or Budapest, whatever, in Hawkeye, because obviously at the end of this film, it sets up Elena will be in the Hawkeye show. And so whenever she has interactions with Clint, we could see more. We could, I'm not sure if a Disney Plus show would show something that big, but that's something potentially. And Anthony, I forget your question. Sorry.
What do we think about the restraint that, they didn't put in a Hawkeye?
Oh,
They could have put in a
loved it.
Sebastian Stan as Winter Soldier. The fact there was great restraint, I felt, on the hands of Kevin Feige specifically, who could have made those calls.
I loved it because it allowed for Kate Shortland to truly make her film. And I think he really trusted the right person to kind of take his hands away off of, if he was to take his hands off any film with any director, I'm delighted he chose this film with her, because she took that opportunity and she ran with it, and she made her film, and she made it the best it could be.
Yeah, I agree, because I do think I was worried as a Marvel fan coming off of the 3-year punch of Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. Like, our audience is going to be okay going back to basics. And I appreciate it. There's really only 6 characters in this movie, 7 if you count O.T. Fag Bentley, who's not really a character. But I like that we brought it back down and we didn't need like Marvel connections. It's another reason why I kind of like this movie being a prequel and starting Phase 4, because it shows us Marvel's focused on storytelling. We're not focused on building up to the next 10-year, 2031 big movie. And that's another reason I really appreciate it. I feel like we need movies like Black Widow, ones that are just focused on the story and the characters. And yeah, they have their little MCU delights and teases, but that's not the focus of the movie. So yes. Jack, anything to note about that before we move on to the next scene?
I thought it was good restraint. I don't think adding like a Winter Soldier or a Hawkeye would have enhanced the film in any way other than being a cool like scene or cameo. And I think it would have been more for the fans than the story. So I think that was a really good decision on their part.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's get into what could be in contention for one of my favorite, if not my favorite scenes in the film is Natasha and Elena, their conversation. First, when they're buying the ibuprofen, where we get that great line, "I'm not the train killer who little girls call their hero," from Elena, and the great poser gag, which just is so, I think it's great in a movie that's so grounded to call out the more superhero, like, I feel like this is like the only time where having your cake and eating it too worked, because they do the poses, but it was just so funny every time. And then the scene where Elena talks about what she imagined for Natasha and like what her life she wishes it was, and we really see that Natasha never thought about this, maybe because she was afraid to, but it was this really, I just found these scenes so beautiful and so touching and so beautifully acted. And again, nothing distracting. It was just focused on these characters and these performances. And again, I feel the poser gag is some great Marvel comedy, one of their better running jokes in any of these films. What do we think of these 2 scenes, really?
I love them. Again, this did a lot to build the dynamic between Yelena and Natasha, and so anything I got from that, I really liked. I thought it was great. Jack?
Yeah, I really liked it too. The poser thing was one of the funnier things that keeps getting referred to throughout the movie. The joke, I like how it gets paid off later on with Yelena, but it's a good setup here. Yeah, I think both very good scenes and well done.
Yeah, wonderful. We also get the vest gag, which now we know that was Yelena's vest in Infinity War. We get the little vest gag, which again, I thought that was very, very cute and very fun. So now we get into Alexi's breakout. This is the white Black Widow suit is in this sequence. It starts off with him in his jail cell, and something I really liked is that he has tattoos of Melina and then on his chest, and then Elena and Natasha on his shoulder, which I think showed that he still remembers them, and we'll talk probably more about that in a sec. I also really like his whole Captain America running thing, because it for me it reminded me of like that classic dad trope of this famous person. Well, I like cut his hair once, or I went with and had a drink with him, which I thought was just like, again, it made this character just immediately feel like very real to me. And also that the minute he was called out on it, David Harbour breaking that guy's hand in arm wrestling just showed how much being the Red Guardian meant to him, that somebody came around, if somebody was going to come around and say that didn't happen, or no, you're lying, like he's not going to let you get away with that. My only other note here, other than, again, the posing thing was great. This whole action scene was fantastic. I really loved the fact that they made a lot of mistakes as the characters, not the filmmakers, in this scene, Elena blowing up the thing that starts the avalanche. I really like that none of these characters were perfect and executing moves perfectly. And then last, I thought it was a great, I think this was Shortland. If not, whoever came up with this idea, I loved the fact that the avalanche hits them the minute that Natasha and Alexi grab hands. The minute she just extends her hand to her family again, specifically that family member, this storm hits them. I just thought that was a wonderful moment that I think Kate Shortland, if it was her idea to do that, just brilliant. What do we think of the Alexi breakout scene?
I loved it. It probably would be in my top favorite of favorite sequences of the movie, but that's not to take away from anything. I thought the acting incredible. David Harbour was really funny, and I thought it was kind of fun. They just left all those prisoners to die with the avalanche. Like, they're imperfect characters, and you said it yourself. They do make a lot of mistakes as characters, and I think these are the most unconventional Marvel heroes that we've ever had. Whether it's Melina and Alexi and Yelena and Natasha, they're all really flawed individuals that have done some not really good things. I think that ultimately makes for a more interesting film. And really and truly, because Melina and Alexi do some horrible things to Yelena and to Natasha, and they're not saints either. Like, we see Yelena kill a fellow Black Widow, like, it's not her fault, but I think it just goes to show how really truly interesting that these characters were, and how brave it was of Marvel to put them in this film. And yeah, I did think that the sequence itself was very well done, and I never thought of that visual metaphor that you brought up, and I think it's really interesting. So yeah, great sequence. Jack?
Yeah, I thought this was a good action sequence. I don't think there's really any bad action in the film, but this would be lower down if I were to rank them, I guess. But I also didn't think of that avalanche hand grabbing whole thing, and I think that's a good addition and nice subtlety to it. And I do, when we're talking about them as imperfect characters, I do kind of wish that they dealt with that a little bit more in terms of Alexi and Melina. They're both kind of, I think they did some terrible, they were good parents for like the 3 years they were there, but they did some not great parenting. I think they kind of made some pretty bad choices afterwards, and I think they're mad at David Harbour or Alexi for a little bit, but I think they're kind of forgiven overall, and they don't tackle it much after that. So I wish they dealt with that a little bit more, but other than that, I really like it.
Yes, Ben?
Sorry, England scored.
Oh.
England scored against Italy. I'm not happy about that.
Yes, for those of you who don't know, the big match with Italy and England is currently happening. So hopefully, I think we're getting close. We have about 2 big sequences left.
Don't worry, we're fine.
We're good. Now we get to the family reunited. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, in my tweet review for this film, I said that I felt this film echoed back to the days of the Spielberg blockbuster. And this was the scene I was talking about in relation to that. Because for me, again, you can argue this. I feel like the best scene in Jaws for me is the scene near the end of the film where our three characters sit down and talk for about 6 minutes. Because it's a scene that if you pitched it, you would probably be like, why does this need to be in the movie? How is this going to work? It has nothing to do with the shark. but it's such a beautiful scene because you have these characters coming together. And for me, that's what I loved about Black Widow, is that you have moments in this movie where it's just focused on the characters. There's nothing flashy. And you get back to this time that I feel Spielberg captured in his early blockbusters, where the scenes can breathe. There's no wasted time. You don't have a lot of quick cuts or quick scenes. Like this movie, another reason why, for me, this movie went by so fast. Every time I see it, it goes by fast because you really have like 6 sequences. You don't have a lot of independent scenes. And so like this whole family reunited thing is about 10 to 12 minutes of the movie, I think. And for me, it doesn't drag. For me, it's one of the most exciting parts of the movie because you get to see these characters coming back together as a family. I love that they sit in the same spot as they did in the first scene. I thought that was a nice touch, especially because you have Florence Pugh, like her hand on her chair, like afraid to sit down. I thought that was a great beat. Again, I thought the comedy worked here, especially because it was like mother, father, and then the kids being like, don't do that, you're embarrassing me type of humor. And then it just became this very heartbreaking thing. And we can go to when they split up after Elena says it was real to me, like my entire family was a lie and nobody told me. I thought Florence Pugh, again, delivering a very, very touching and poignant performance. And then when they split up and Melina sticks with Scarlett, sticks with Natasha, and Alexi goes with Elena. And I thought both scenes were just so touching. Melina saying, "How did you keep your heart, Natasha?" And she says, "Pain only makes us stronger," which is what she told Elena in the first scene, which I thought was beautiful. And I want to take a moment to talk about Rachel Weisz here specifically. This is where she really gets her moments to shine, because her arc is very quickly. She goes from this to helping them fight in the third act just in this one scene. And in lesser hands, I feel that could have been rushed. But because you see it on her face, how much it really sets in the impact that she had on these 2 women when they were kids for just 3 years. You know, she did have a positive impact on them. And she also sees that Natasha was able to do what Melina never did. And maybe if Natasha did get out of the Red Room, she also has a chance. So I thought all of that was touching. We get the American Pie call back here as well, when David Harbour sings that. Again, another beautiful moment that was very efficient. It really just captured what Elena needed at that moment, was for somebody to reference that a positive memory from their childhood to show that it was real. And so all of the scenes that happened at Melina's house, Melina's farm, I thought were just touching and just, I think, summed up the movie so well. And the fact that in a big Marvel movie, you know, Avengers Endgame is structured that it always kept escalating, that you had your slower things in the beginning, and by the end, you know, you had Avengers Assemble. The fact in a movie like this, made today in 2021, you can have your breakdown, your slowdown at the end of the second act. Like, this is the end of Act 2 low point, if you know the story structure nomenclature. The fact that this is your end of Act 2 low point, there's nothing flashy, there's no action, there's no big plot reveal, that it's a family coming together. I just found that very refreshing to see in a modern blockbuster. So what do we think of this whole sequence? I feel like it's covered like 20 minutes of screen time, but I love this scene so much. What did we think of the family reunited?
It was definitely my favorite part of the movie. I 100%, because everyone was at their best, particularly Rachel Weisz, as you said, who was really, really good in the movie. I would say not one of, I would say the best, like, veteran actor coming back. Like, Glenn Close was barely in Guardians, and Annette Bening was barely in Captain Marvel, but Rachel Weisz, she was in this movie, and she did not play around. She had a really, like a decent role, and she did a lot with it. And it was a really heartbreaking scene, particularly for Elena. I felt a lot for her. And when she was talking with her father, like, I understand, like, there was comedy in the scene, but it was more emotional than comedic, in my opinion, because David Harbour, his character, Alexi, really did feel like he had a lot to make up for with these 2 girls who are still his girls in a way. Like, he thinks of them that way. But that's what I took from it. I just thought it was really emotional, really well done, and goes to show that this is such a different type of film, that you can have this type of scene so late in the film. You would never get this in your Iron Mans or your Thors, but you get it in Black Widow, and that's what I think makes her as a character so different, and also this film so different. So I really loved it. What about you, Jack?
Yeah, I think this is probably a highlight, if not the biggest highlight for me in the movie, because the story of this film is, I think, relatively simple. I don't think that's maybe the strong point here. I think it's pretty basic once you get into it. Not a lot of complicated stuff in there. I think the main reason why this movie works is the characters and the performances from the actors. So I think this scene where they all reunite in all of their past trauma and trauma caused by each other unravels here. And I think throughout the movie, and it's kind of like highlighted here, Elena is kind of the, I think, emotional center of the movie, even more so than Natasha, because of how she felt this family was so real. And I think she's the one who's still holding out the most hope for the family compared to everyone else. Probably Alexi right behind her. And yeah, I think just a lot of great dialogue here. I do think Rachel Weisz, when people are talking about this film, lots of people say, oh, David Harbour's a highlight, Florence Pugh's a highlight, all these people. But I think Rachel Weisz deserves to be called out as one of the highlights too. I think she doesn't get as much to do as either of them, but with what she's given, I think she does a great job. And yeah, I think especially in the third act, she gets a few comedic beats that I thought were very good too. But for this scene, yes, this is kind of the emotional middle of the film, the center that really worked well.
Yeah, definitely everything that you both said. And there's a couple of nice, again, to praise Kate Shortland a little bit more. I love that when Melina first sees the trio, Alexi, Elena, and Natasha, that there's a gate in between them. I thought that was a very nice visual metaphor for what has happened to them all. As a fan of Black Widow from the comics, I like that Yelena brought up the Crimson Dynamo, which, if you don't know, was the villain in the first appearance of Black Widow in the Marvel Comics in Tales of Suspense number 52. I thought that was a nice little Easter egg for them to throw in there. But yeah, just wonderful. Also, one last emotional beat of this scene was the scrapbook. And I love Natasha reading through it and saying, like, I knew all the gifts were fake, that they were empty boxes, but I still wanted to open them to make it feel real for at least one moment. Again, you don't need to, it's like, I feel like there's a lot of, there's more, this movie trusts its audience more than a lot of modern blockbusters do. You just say, you say it once and that's enough. You don't have to labor the point. Like, and I thought that was, again, really, really strong. Now the third act, the Red Room, we finally get to see it. And personally, for me, I know, we had Dreykov, which we're about to officially meet within the narrative. We had Taskmaster. But for me, I kind of see the antagonist being just the Red Room personified. And that's why I think it's cathartic when the Red Room comes down. Because I think that's the whole point. What's pushing the movie along is this fear of the Red Room, what the Red Room represents in the Black Widow program. And so I think ending it with the Red Room was great. We have, on second viewing, I picked this up more. As I think I'm the only person who's seen it multiple times here. I think you both saw it once, correct?
Once.
Yeah. I'm sure they will be seeing it again. But as for this taping, they've only seen it
Tuesday.
once. Tuesday, yes. On the second viewing for me, and so forth, because I've seen it more than twice, the Natasha is Melina twist that they do, where she's in that Winter Soldier disguising tech. I found it works really well because the way Shortland shoots it is there's a lot of fear on Rachel Weisz's face, which you can tell is Natasha fearing returning. And when Melina looks at all the Black Widow's training, I thought Rachel Weisz did a really great job of portraying what Natasha would be feeling returning to the Red Room. And then we meet Dreykov. We finally meet Dreykov. What do we think of Ray Winstone in this film?
Played a great villain, very menacing. Didn't like him at all, and so he did his job as an actor.
Good. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I think he did his job. He served the character and what we needed for the character in the movie well. I do think it's one of Marvel's more basic villains. There's no complexity to him, really. He's kind of just a bad, evil guy who's running this terrible operation, but I don't think this
he was evil.
Yeah, he was very evil, but I don't think this is a character that you want to necessarily add complexity to, or like you kind of understand where he's coming from, like you do with someone like Killmonger or Thanos, just because I don't know how you could understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
So I think
good especially film. If Ben mentioned whether this could have been in another world, and a Warner Brothers owns Marvel world, if this could have been an R-rated, maybe we get a little bit more complexity with Dreykov. But I don't think you need it. And I feel like that's the only way that you could do it. But I also kind of like that, we didn't get like a flashback with Ray Winstone and young Natasha. Like he's kind of kept at bay for the entirety of the movie until Natasha officially sees him again. So you as the audience go on that journey with her. You don't see him until really the end, which I liked. Now, what do we think about this pheromonal lock that she couldn't hurt Dreykov, and none of the widows can, because there's a pheromonal lock that when they're in the presence of him and they smell his pheromones, they can't hurt him. Personally, I thought this worked thematically better than it working literally, because it was like, okay, men having control over women. Like I felt like thematically it worked better. Literally, I was like, that seems a little stupid. But again, I was willing to go with it for how it was going thematically. And also I thought it was a cool little thing that Natasha was insulting him. And I was like, why are you insulting him? Because she's trying to get Dreykov to break her nose himself.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice thing. And when, of course, he doesn't do it, then she breaks the nerve, which I thought that was a great line and a great moment. What do we think about this whole pheromonal lock and this scene in general, their conversation together?
I agree with you. Soviet technology was definitely not that far ahead in the 1990s or 80s. I don't think that could have been pulled off literally, but I do think thematically it worked really well with the film. And it was a really great moment when Natasha was able to fight back. So I thought that was like really cool. And it was really stupid how Dreykov didn't realize what he was doing to Natasha. Like, if it's this one thing that he has and he knows that he's trained this girl to be such a deadly weapon, you'd at least think he'd be more careful. But, I thought it worked really cool. And if you suspend your disbelief a little bit, it works perfectly fine. Yeah?
Yeah, I think like Anthony said, it works pretty well thematically with like the men having power over women and like taking away their control and all that. In terms of like realisticness, it's not very realistic at all. I think there are these moments within this film, or like even one of the other more grounded films like Winter Soldier, like when Nick Fury takes out his little
lightsaber
thing and lights a hole big enough to go all the way underground within like 5 seconds. You kind of have to suspend your disbelief for certain things. And there was even thematic stuff with like that, because there's a lot of thematic power to this, even though it's unrealistic and like a little cheesy. I think it's not a big drawback to the film because it has a lot of thematic power to it.
Great. Wonderful. Something we should bring up too is in this little sequence, two things. One, when he said, I recycled the one resource that the world kept throwing away, girls. And we hear that choir come in. I thought, we haven't mentioned him yet. We should mention him now. Lorne Balfe, who did the score for Mission Impossible Fallout, did the score here. Wonderful job. Really loved that specific beat. Also, the Taskmaster 3-note theme I thought was really well done. And on that note, Taskmaster, the big twist that he is actually Antonia Dreykov. Well, she is Antonia Dreykov. Dreykov's daughter lives. Listen, we are all, if, I know we've been gushing about Marvel for the last 45 minutes, but we are also all a fan of the Snyder DC trilogy. I think I can speak for us that we're fine with different interpretations of comic book characters. I was fine with this because, listen, if you're going to make a change to a character, it has to work within the narrative of the story. And I felt making Taskmaster Dreykov's daughter did work within the context of the story. And again, on second viewing, going back and seeing that this is a ghost from Natasha's past coming to get her, it works, I think, very well. And I think it underscores a lot of the themes of the film. So I was completely fine with this change. What did we think of Taskmaster's reveal here?
I too was fine with it for the exact reason you said. I don't know a lot about Taskmaster. Hope that we see more character like in other Marvel films. I think that would be interesting because it is an interesting concept to have for a character. But with what you said, I don't think it's an issue that they changed who the character was, because it worked really well with the story. And it also allowed for a really emotional final fight with Natasha versus Taskmaster. I thought that was a really well done fight, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. But with what you said, with it being a ghost from Natasha's past and how that ghost is really, really strong, I thought was a very, very smart thing, and also a very like it was a good Marvel thing. I think it worked really well in the terms of the MCU as one of the better. I don't really want to say Taskmaster is a villain, because Taskmaster is not in control of her
She's
actions for
she's
the entire
more in
film.
the ghost territory from Ant-Man and the Wasp. As
Yeah,
these, like, strong
I loved Ghost.
anti-heroes.
She
I
was
love Ghost
amazing.
as well.
Mm.
Jack, what do we think of the Taskmaster twist?
In terms of the twist, I did see it coming, but in terms of the character, I thought that was a really good choice. I think if it was just the guy from the comics, I mean, there's no emotional attachment to Natasha there. He's just some guy who's going after her. But if you're trying to make the character more connected to Natasha, to her path and journey on this movie and all that, I think making it Antonia Drakeout's daughter adds that layer to it than if it was just some random dude going after her. So I think that helps a lot. I get kind of Winter Soldier vibes from, like, almost like they try, like maybe if they had more Black Widow movies, they could have set this up a little more. It's almost like trying to have the Bucky reveal in Winter Soldier, but with her.
It's a great,
But
great analogy, yeah.
I thought it worked for what it was very well. And I think it added just more emotion to the character than what would have been there if it was just like Ray Winstone's henchman.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, listen, if there's any Marvel fans listening who are big Taskmaster fans from the comics, you know, couple things. One, with this movie, we've been proven that we had a Black Widow, and now the baton is passed to Elena Belova. We can have the passing of batons of the same character. Two, I also think that, you know, look at what's happening with the Mandarin and Shang-Chi. You know, I don't think that if I don't think Tony Masters, who is the comic book character, is off the table when it comes to the MCU. Especially if there's a sequel to this movie, maybe with Elena Belova in the starring role, which we can end with. We can talk about the future of this film, if there is any. And also, I think, in terms of Antonia, I think Taskmaster, as it is in this film, will return the same way that Winter Soldier returned. That Winter Soldier is the villain in his movie, in Captain America 2, and he's a great villain, and now he's one of our most beloved heroes. So I think that I see a similar fate following Antonia if they want to continue with it. And I hope they do. I hope that the little minor gripes that people are having with this character don't stop her from having a longer future in the MCU. Then we have the big fight, first with Natasha against all the widows, but then we also then have the Red Room coming down, which I thought that was a great little thing with Melina when she's like on the comms and she's like, Yelena, I had to improvise. We're going into a complete controlled crash. Thought that was great. And I have to give Rachel Weisz credit. She's 51 years old and she was kicking ass in this movie. That was fantastic to see. I thought, again, Rachel Weisz, wonderful, wonderful job. Her husband would be proud. If you don't know, her husband is James Bond, Daniel Craig. I think she gave him a run for his money in this movie. But what did we think of this? And specifically, what are your comments on the CGI? The CGI has been brought up with this movie. Some people think it doesn't look great. To me, I mean, I'm of the mind of somebody who grew up with like the original Star Wars trilogy and Star Trek. And listen, yes, it's not real. I'm not looking for photorealism. I'm looking for a story, and this worked well enough for me that I was able to suspend my disbelief. And I really did, you know, when Natasha was falling and grabbing Yelena, that emotional beat hit. So if it hit for me, that means the CGI must have been good enough. And for me, I actually think it did look fine. Had I been divorced from the discussions that were going on in this movie, I probably wouldn't have noticed the CGI being that alarming. I mean, this isn't real. This isn't Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
You can't blow up a building in space, especially because this movie probably had some, you know, crazy, you know, this is a coming out during a pandemic. I'm pretty sure it was ended by that point, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
I don't think the CGI was that badly done. I thought it was pretty well done. What do you guys think?
Initially, when I saw it in the trailer, I was absolutely atrocious. Like, I was worried about how bad it looked in third act with them falling. Like, you could totally tell that like it was a CGI double when Scarlett Johansson's like on that like thing and all. I thought it looked really terrible in the film. I think there are far worse CGI in a lot of other films than in Black Widow, and since it was so minuscule, I feel like it really wasn't that prevalent in the film. I find it really interesting that people are pointing it out in this film, which like could have some issues for people, whether it's small ones. I do think it's just nitpicking. I really don't think it's that big of a deal whatsoever. I can point out 10 other Marvel films with far worse CGI. I thought that this film, for the most part, again, it wasn't perfect, but the things in the trailer that looked atrocious to me, I barely noticed in the film, like at all.
Which
like,
I think that was a work in
that
progress.
Explosion. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think except for the explosion where like, okay, that's pretty noticeable. But other than that, I would say it was pretty perfect throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I thought there's only like one or two shots in this final part where the CGI I think is like noticeably maybe not amazing, but that happens in any movie with significant CGI. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. The specific shot would be like when she latches onto Elena and gives her the parachute and then lets go. I thought that looked a little unrealistic, but there's no way you can really do that realistically. So it wasn't a big deal for me. The issue, I didn't really have an issue with it per se, but I just wish it maybe didn't end so, once again, over the top with it exploding, them jumping down, her giving her a parachute, grabbing another parachute, grabbing onto Taskmaster, parachuting herself. A little too much for me personally. I think maybe why some people are saying that CGI stands out is because through a lot of this film previously, there's it's much more gritty and grounded and like it's just stunt double action, not a lot of like CGI like characters fighting. So I think maybe that's why it sticks out a little more to some people. But the CGI was fine in my opinion, and the ending was a good action scene. I did like that Melena joke that you mentioned of
Melina,
change of plans. So yeah, I did think that was a really good joke.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think in the end, like, I feel like what Jack was saying with like it's a much bigger set piece than the rest of the movie. I feel like they saw Winter Soldier like because it looked very similar, but it's like this time the Shield headquarters is gonna be falling to the ground. That was their way of upping it. But yeah, I really like this. I think it was. I also think again thematically, visually, having Natasha's past explode around her, and she's not only fighting for her life, but I think I saw a deeper meaning of does she get to leave this behind, or does she get buried with it? And because as she's trying to escape and the pieces are falling out of her life, like does she get to survive and move on? We of course know she does. And on that note, I just want to say, as there have been a lot of prequels made, I feel like this is one of the better ones where I completely divorced myself of, oh wait, she has to live because she dies in 2 movies. Like I felt worried for her, and after the Star Wars prequels and the Hobbit trilogy, this is one of the better versions of you created tension and stakes within your film to the point that I was nervous for Natasha and the other characters, because I feel like we knew that Florence Pugh, at least I did. I didn't. There was the theory that she wouldn't make it out of this movie, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" So
at one point, I did think when she grabbed the staff and pushed it into the engine, I thought maybe Natasha would like think that she died, and that's why she wore the jacket and like honored her or whatever. But
imagine if she thinks she died and the jacket just flew off of her.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty funny. But yeah, and then we end. We have that great. I just love that shot. I actually got to see this film. I went up into New York and saw it on the biggest IMAX screen in the country, in the US. And so that final shot, the IMAX, if you've been to it, I highly suggest you do. They filled the screen. They got rid of the black bars. So seeing that last shot of Natasha looking at the cavalry coming in was just so cool. I I loved Melina's joke of, "Are you okay?" "Well, I'm clearly injured, but I'll be fine." And and also I love that we know that this is probably, they haven't said whether Elena was blipped. My guess is yes, because I just think that just makes
Yeah.
the sense. But the fact that last shot of Natasha, where the sun is setting, I think, or it's rising probably, and that glow of the sun as Natasha's standing in front of it, I just thought that was just a beautiful moment, because we know that's the last time Elena will ever see Natasha, and she whistles, and I
Yeah.
thought that was a touching moment. And then the final scene, she's donned the blonde hair and the vest, and somebody mentioned that the last time we saw Natasha Romanoff, like the last time we saw Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, and they were all smiling, which I thought that was a little nice little button. And then we end on the fireflies, which I loved because it showed Natasha returning to a time in her life when she wasn't alone, and that her life is what she wishes it to be, that she has some control over it. So I thought that was a lovely little ending note right after they played that Avengers theme. What do we guys think of the final 10 minutes of the film? Anything jump out?
I have nothing really over the top to say. I thought it did end pretty poetically, and it is really tragic, because you really fall in love with the bond between Yelena and Natasha. I think it's pretty obvious she was blipped, because I don't think that Black Widow would have been the mess that she was before mission in Infinity War, and I don't think she would have been felt as alone as she did, so as she would sacrifice herself in Vormir if all of her family had survived the blip. So I think that they probably all did die, and I think that it is very tragic, looking back on the final shot between the two of them, and also with the uncredited scene with what we see with Yelena. I think it is very, very sad, and it was the perfect note to end really different MCU film on.
Mm-hmm. Jack,
Yeah,
anything?
I think a few things. I agree with everything you guys have said in terms of Natasha and Elena and the rest of the family in the ending. A few things I want to point out. Taskmaster, when I think Antonia is awoken from that as the mist hits her face. I forget the actress's name. I think it's Olga. Her performance in that scene I thought was really well done. And
Olga Kurylenko.
Yeah. Speaking of Bond, who is in Quantum of Solace.
I love her so much.
I forget what she says. She says, is he gone or something?
Is he gone, I think. Is he gone? 3 words. So well delivered.
Yeah, really emotionally powerful. And then the Black Widows and Elena, of course, take her away with them. I do wish we got maybe a little more with those Black Widows, but that's just a minor nitpick. And then, yes, I do like where we left everyone before the whole Infinity War and then Endgame situation. I thought it was a nice point to leave it off, and I hope we get to see like Yelena's reaction years later to Natasha's death as she's mourning her. I hope we get to see Red Guardian and Melina deal with that too at some point in the future. But I did like how it ended. In terms of her and General Ross, do you think she confronted him, or do you think she just ran away? I wasn't sure at the end.
I believe she just. I believe she was able to escape, just because when in Infinity War, when Cap and her and Falcon and Wanda and Vision go back to Avengers Campus, she says you'll need some of that right now. I feel like they're definitely on more amicable terms, but at the same time, he would have taken her in, so she must have escaped. Yeah. I mean, she was always, that's something I love about the character. She always did. I feel like out of all of them, she valued the Avengers the most, and she was the one that was most willing to work with everybody. When everybody was like Team Cap or Team Iron Man for Civil War, I was like Team Black Widow. She's the one who cares most about bringing you guys together, and she's the one who's like, you still have one hand on the wheel, you can still steer. And so I feel like she again was the one who was the most willing to work with others, and so possible with Ross. The end credit scene, I think, we only had one because we had that opening credits. So we only had one end credit scene. Definitely one of their best, in my opinion. And I think definitely not only one that's exciting for the future of the franchise, but I think this will go down in history as a moment that people will look back to, because I think this is canonically the first time a character from a streaming service has made their way to the films. on any streaming platform, I believe. This, we've had Netflix movies premiere in theaters like Cinemark, but this is the first time that we've had such a push for streaming. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Valentina was supposed to premiere in here. I'm glad she didn't, actually. I'm glad that we had already been introduced to her before this. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she's such a wonderful talent and comedian because she didn't lessen the first half of this scene, but she still brought her flavor. Ben, you were very excited to talk about this end credit scene. What do you think? Because it was so beautiful and touching at the beginning. Perfect note to really show Elena, and then we get this big tease for Hawkeye.
I think it was perfect because it showed kind of the end of this film with Florence Pugh's character really saying goodbye to Natasha, while also showing who Elena has now become with her interactions with Valentina. I thought she was very edgy, sarcastic, funny. She was all the stuff that we had already seen, but with a bit more of an edge to her, and I really appreciated that. And also Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Like, I wasn't the biggest fan of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but when I say she was my favorite part of that show, when she was on the screen, she lit it up. She was absolutely phenomenal. And she's definitely going to get an Emmy nomination for Best Guest Actress for a drama show. She's currently favored on the betting odds to be nominated. Kind of the only performance on that show, with ironically, but still probably my favorite. And I'm delighted for her. And I hope that she shows up. She's kind of like a new Nick Fury, but an evil one. And I really like that. She's the perfect actress to take on this role. And I'm really loving what I'm seeing from her so far. So I cannot wait for Hawkeye. And I cannot wait for the future of Yelena Belova in the MCU.
Yeah. I also really like the post-credit scene. I'm glad we met Valentina in Falcon and Winter Soldier before, because here we're introduced to her like Florence Pugh. Yelena already knows who she is. There's already a relationship established there. Whereas in Falcon and Winter Soldier, John Walker is kind of in the same boat as us as an audience. Like, who is this person?
Yeah.
So I think that's a better introduction to the character. And now that we know who she is, we see her in a more established relationship. And I do think her blowing her nose didn't really, I think the way that scene could have been handled, it could have undercut that emotional moment. But I think the way it was handled, it didn't, thankfully. One little note thing, earlier in the movie, Yelena's like, I want to get a dog. And then it ends and she has a dog. And then it also names it after Natasha's fake alias of Fanny. So I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, and another, speaking of a nice little bookend thing, in the first scene with Natasha, with Ross, she says something to the effect of, you trying to capture me looks desperate. And Yelena says to Valentina that coming to me on my holiday time looks desperate. I thought that was a little nice button of like, Yelena has now reached the point where Scarlet was at the beginning of the film, where she's let go of the Red Room and her past. And yes, listen, I'm a fan of the Matt Fraction comic, which I think is what's being closely adapted for the Hawkeye show. And now that's going to have Florence Pugh, this is going to be, I saw some people teasing it, a Haley Steinfeld Florence Pugh fight scene is something that I think will light up Disney Plus come this fall. Really, really strong. Last note before we end this review, what do we think about the future of this film? Do we think there's a future for this film? Would you like to see any Disney Plus spinoffs, or would you prefer to see a Black Widow sequel that just has Yelena in the starring role? Because personally, I think it would be an absolute shame if Kate Shortland did not get another installment of something in this franchise, because I think her voice and her vision is so distinct, yet I think perfect. It's weird. I never would have thought this, but I think she perfectly fits with this sector of the MCU. I think she really is if I would want the Russo brothers to pass the baton to anybody, I would pass it to her in a heartbeat. So what do we think? What would we like to see more of, especially in terms of Yelena Belova's future in the MCU?
I think Yelena Belova is going to be a big character going forward, but I definitely think that there needs to be more films on this corner of the MCU, because by far and away, it is the most interesting corner that I have encountered in a very long time in Marvel. It really engaged me, and it would be a shame to see it let go. I don't think the Russo brothers, in my opinion, ever got back to the Winter Soldier level in how they direct. Like, they did a bigger film with Avengers Endgame, and it's definitely more impressive technically. But I don't think they ever topped it with story and action wise. I think Kate Shortland is the that came the close. So I really do think she should be given another Black Widow film, 100%. Yeah.
Yes, I think she should be given some sort of other project. I don't know if Elena. I don't think it's made clear if Elena's like taking the actual Black Widow name at the end of this movie, or if she's just like continuing her legacy. It's kind of unclear at this point. But I do want to see whatever happens next with Elena, have Kate Shortland involved in some way, whether it's they end up doing like Dark Avengers or whatever. I think if they made that a movie or something, let Kate Shortland handle that. But yeah, I really like the way they ended it, and I think there's a lot of potential in what's set up here with Elena and then Red Guardian, Melina, Taskmaster, all the Black Widows. I think there's a lot of different routes they can take these characters.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% echo that. Even though Natasha wouldn't be in it, I do think that if they did the Black Widow trilogy and the second and third are Elena focused, I think that would be completely fine. I don't think it would be a betrayal, because this is another thing. And to be frankly honest, I'm very happy this movie exists, because as a Black Widow fan, I was really getting tired of people making fun of her. And especially when Avengers Endgame came out and everybody's like, this movie failed Black Widow. It's like, this movie gave Black Widow such a fitting end. And it finally made people realize the importance she had on the story. And so I don't think it would be a betrayal if they made the trilogy and Elena was the focus of 2 and 3. I think it would follow the same trajectory of the Captain Americas, where the first one is different than the other two. So I hope she gets the chance. If she wants to do a Dark Avengers thing, that would be cool. But I do think there's a simplicity and that's not a negative connotation. I think it's great that it's simple. There's a simplicity to this movie because it's so controlled and has so much integrity because of that I don't necessarily want her to go big. There are a lot of people who can go big. If she stays small and makes a movie at the same level as this movie with Elena in present day, even though this movie only took place 5 years earlier, I think that's what would be my wish, is a Captain America Winter Soldier type sequel for this movie. Any final thoughts? I think we hit everything.
Yeah.
I hope news comes out of a future project soon. We already know the box office came in 80 million domestic, 60 million on Disney Plus Premier Access. That's sure to be quite a talking point in the weeks to come. But Ant-Man made 55 million. The sequel was greenlit pretty soon after. So hopefully we get something for the future of Yelena Belova, Kate Shortland, and also Eric Pearson. I want to mention he wrote the screenplay. He also wrote the screenplay, I believe, for Thor Ragnarok, which I know a lot of people love. For me, I think this was definitely an improvement on his script skills. So kudos to him, and kudos to Kevin Feige, man. We doubt him, but the fact that he waited till July 9th, it seemed like this was the right time for release. It got people back to theaters. We doubted him. In Feige we trust, I guess, because he delivered as a Black Widow super fan, as somebody who always related to this character. I think this movie captures her distinct and unique humanity. So I'm very happy. Guys, what do you think? Final thoughts on Black Widow?
I loved it. I would definitely give them an 8 out of 10. It is definitely the perfect end to I suppose Avengers Endgame was the end, but I think Black Widow truly is the end of kind of the old guard of the MCU, while pointing a definitive finger into the future, whether it's Disney Plus shows or different characters here or there, or the vibe that these films are going to be having. I think it is the perfect film to, in a way, start Phase 4. It was incredible. I loved it.
Yeah, just something popped in my mind while we were talking. I think Black Panther, that I think is in a similar situation where I think they're going to do a trilogy of movies there, and I think they're probably going to switch leads in the second one under different circumstances. But I do think you can do that here too with Elena.
Yeah.
But in terms of this movie, I thought it was really well done. One of the most emotional and grounded overall films in the MCU. I think Natasha had a good ending in Endgame, but I do think she didn't get like the perfect send off there. I do think she deserved like a little more than just that discussion on that little like lake patio. I'm glad that she got her own like grave and like mourning scene here. And I do think this film uh, colors how we see a lot of her decisions in Endgame and other MCU movies after this film. So I think it's a really good addition that it's like unlike some prequels, it adds stuff to other movies, and I think just overall, it's a really good movie.
Yeah, definitely. I think one last note to end on is just that, you know, a lot of people ask, what's the point of this movie? And I think not only is it the point is because this character deserves a solo movie and the actor, because I do think, on a side note, you know, Scarlett Johansson had to suffer a lot of BS to get to the point where we can have female heroes popping up. It's why I didn't mind the big A-Force moment in Endgame, because, you know, it's because of her. She took that first step. She took those really crass jokes and interview questions about fashion and underwear and stuff. So I think she deserved this movie. But I also think that, you know, when Civil War happens, the Avengers disband, Natasha, you know, the Avengers disbanded. She couldn't do anything. But in Endgame, she could have done something, and she did it. And I feel like that really showed the growth of what she learned in this movie, is that she was willing to risk everything to save something she loved. So I definitely think great film. Thank you guys so much for talking with us. Thank you for anybody who's watching for sticking with us. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and check us all out on the council. We're doing live reviews for the summer, talking about all the big tent poles. We have Space Jam 2 coming up this Saturday, and then season 4 returns soon. So thank you all so much, and see you in a minute.
Bye.